Hi, patrons.
What's up, buttheads? Sorry, that was mean. Hi,
Why?
patrons. I listen. It's been a hectic week. I'm getting ready to travel for the week, so like I'm getting ready to head out of town, and I'm just trying to, I'm trying to manage my stuff. I'm not coping. Is what the problem is.
I see.
I didn't mean it though.
Houselessness, part two.
Yes, we are covering houselessness, which I think this will be shorter than the last one, depending on how we talk. But
Yeah, yeah. I did pad out the other one quite a bit, but I think it should be a little shorter.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see when we get into it.
100%.
Have you ever played
Uh,
around with Linktree at all? Are you familiar with that platform or that tool?
does not sound familiar.
So basically, like it's a way that you can like organize all of the things that you do onto like a single page. Like so, it's basically just like organizing all your links and making it like really presentable.
Mm.
And so I've been trying to do that lately. Like I've been trying to do it more recently because I'm trying to get like all of like my public facing CEs together and like all the publications and stuff and all the podcasts and whatnot. And man, I think I do too much.
Eh,
I think that's what I landed on.
you do a lot.
Like I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is too many things.
It's funny. You're
Yeah,
a
it's a
busy
little
guy.
ridiculous. I know. I gotta be less busy. I gotta work on that.
All right. So we were in the middle of our myths last time.
Yeah, I figure, yeah, we covered 1 through 4. I figure we can do quick reminders of what those four are, and like maybe like a quick reminder of the definitions, quick reminder of the four that we covered, and then dive right back into the next four.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. All right. Check, 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 check. All right. It's right in my ear. Okay.
Hmm. Okay. All right. I think my audio looks good. My notes are prepared. What did we talk about last time? So we did the whole thing on describing it as unhoused or houselessness.
Yes.
We talked about how there's a lot of systemic racism in this.
Yes, there's lots of things.
People, yeah, then the myths to cover. Okay, cool. All right. Ready to get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So get us going. Count us down. All right. Three, two, one, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your still tenting it host, Abraham.
And I'm your future tiny home host, Shane.
We are a psychology podcast. We talk about all of the things that humans and non-human animals do and try and understand them through the lens of science and psychology and scientific psychology, if you will. And if you are joining us for the first time, I do want to point out that this is a second part in what will definitely be a two-part series on this particular topic, which is houselessness.
Yes, and so today we are going to do a brief recap of what happened in that previous episode, but we do recommend listening to that previous episode because there's a lot of detail and a lot of important stats and stuff that I think will be helpful for understanding houselessness as it pertains specifically to the United States and some of the misconceptions that come up there.
Nevertheless, if you do choose to just go ahead and not do that. Go back and listen to that one if you haven't heard it already. We will do our best. Like you'll still get information from this that I think is usable. You just won't have some of the foundation that we established and some of the details and nuance that we had discussed last time. But that's okay. We'll do a quick summary before we dive into this, and then you do you, I guess. Listen however you're going to listen. And thanks for being here at all, really. And if you're joining us for the first time, then I would say thank you so much for being here. At the end of this discussion, we do some fun thing called recommendations, and I'll talk about all the ways that you can support us if you end up enjoying what you hear and would like to. But I'll quickly say that you can do this by joining us on Patreon, picking up some merch, leaving us a rating and a review, liking, subscribing, and telling a friend about us. But again, I'll detail more of that at the end of this discussion. But I'd also like to say that for returning listeners, thanks for being here with us. Glad you're coming back. I hope
Yeah.
you enjoy today's episode as all the past ones that you have likely enjoyed.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you want to support us, we obviously would definitely appreciate that. But whether or not you are new, whether or not you are old, in terms of your listenership to us, young or old, new or returning, I would like to wish you all Global Day of the Engineer.
That sounds ominous, I think.
It does kind of sound
As far
ominous.
as yeah, that's like a weird anyway. It's also International Fact Checking Day. So
Wow.
I don't know if the US celebrates that anymore, but I feel like we should.
Yeah, we should. Definitely we do not anymore. National Day of Hope. Oh, well, good luck with that.
Oof. It's also National Ferret Day. So happy
Oh,
day for those long, snaky, furry things.
they're cute. I love ferrets.
They're
It is
adorable.
National Love Your Produce Manager Day. Maybe like platonic love.
Yeah, like maybe more of like a greater appreciation than you normally do. Like
Yeah.
don't go after the lettuce guy. It is National Peanut Butter and Jelly Day, which is I'm gonna make an
Hooray.
argument. I'm gonna say something controversial here. I
Okay.
think that might be the best kind of sandwich.
That's fair. I tell you what, I love peanut butter and jelly, and I'm also very good with just peanut butter on a
Yes, 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 yes,
sandwich.
yes, yes. Uh-huh.
But that is I like it, and I don't know about you, but I prefer my bread a little toasted, the little toasted peanut butter and jelly
Ooh,
sandwich.
that sounds really good.
Yeah. But I mean, however you get the peanut butter and jelly in there, I mean, it's a victory. So this is one of we've talked about a lot of holidays, but this one I think really stands out as a
I
fantastic
think
one.
this might be our favorite holiday for
Yeah,
the year.
we spent a lot of time on it already, but I mean, there's lots of great ones. There's like Science Day or like, protecting people, vulnerable populations. There's tons of stuff like that that are
Sure,
awesome,
sure.
but maybe my favorite food holiday.
Yeah, that's fair.
All
Reasonable.
right. That was the most amount of time we've ever spent talking about a holiday. It is also National Walking Day.
It certainly is. It's also Paraprofessional Appreciation Day, so please give them appreciation. Don't underestimate them.
Okay, I might need your help with this one. Is this Pascua?
That's the way that I would assume.
Okay,
It's
Pascua, Florida Day.
yeah. So as a Floridian, that's the first time I've ever heard of this.
Oh, okay. Got you.
So,
Great.
yeah. It's also Reconciliation Day.
Fair enough. Truth and Reconciliation, if you are a fan of the Halo franchise. It is World Autism Awareness Day,
It certainly is. It is American Crossword Puzzle Week.
and it is APAWS or APAWS, International Pooper Scooper Week.
I do appreciate the term pooper scooper and that like somebody had to go through like a trademark and copyright and all that
Yeah,
stuff to get that approved and like
they
there was probably
workshopped
people that were
that.
pretty upset about that. Oh yeah, that was like the thing that they ended on and people were pretty they had to go through official paperwork. I love
I,
that.
I think it was an accomplishment. Good job.
Yeah, good job on them. It is Golden Rule Week.
Oh, okay. Very nice. Very nice.
Mhm.
It is Laugh at Work Week. I do that sometimes.
Because if you don't you'll cry at work week. um I'm just kidding. No, just kidding. It is Medication Safety Week. Super important.
It is Testicular Cancer Awareness Week, also super important.
Yes, 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 yes. Now, we also it's the second of the month. It's April 2nd, so we are entering a new month of celebrations, and so this month it is National Pickleball Month.
Oh my goodness. Okay. That's exciting.
Uh-huh.
It is also Limb Loss and Limb Difference Awareness Month. Hey, we've done at least an episode on this. I know we talked about phantom limb pain.
Yes, we did. We did. It is also National Brunch Month, which I don't think that we've done an episode on brunch. Maybe we should.
Good. We did talk, I think, about 3 meals per day.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, we didn't unpack the Hobbit meals. Um,
Mm,
so
one day.
uh, National Child Abuse Prevention Month. That one I was keenly aware of. We've talked about that before for April, but good to remind people
Yep.
don't
Yep.
don't abuse children.
Yeah. Yeah. It's National Humor Month as well.
Interesting juxtaposition.
Uh-huh.
And as we mentioned, National Autism Awareness Month or Acceptance Month is another way that this is talked about.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, we do more than just talk about holidays. That's just a fun. That's the amuse bouche, if you will, as we go
Ah,
into
yes.
our discussion. Um, just kicking off with our brand of thinking and talking about things, I guess. So we are, as we mentioned, returning to our discussion about houselessness. So let's do a quick recap of what we talked about last time. And I think as a quick summary, some of the things that we did is we distinguished um, homelessness from houselessness and sort of why there are practical reasons, not just
Yes.
politically correct ones. Although, again, as we've talked about before, it's not wrong to try and be sensitive and not be a jerk to people.
Right?
But anyway, we I think unpacked the technical justification for why we call it houselessness instead of homelessness. And one that I thought was a poignant example in this is that people who live and travel in an RV by choice, we don't usually talk about them as being homeless. And in fact, they might call that their home because that is where they live and spend all their time. And there are other examples too of people who live in things that are not conventionally houses, whether or not they choose to end up there. It just is technically more accurate to call it houselessness.
Right. We also talked about the rise of houselessness since 2022. There's been a pretty significant increase in houselessness, people entering emergency shelters, and we also have seen that there is a pretty significant amount of people that, as far as demographics go, that include people of color, veterans as well. And so there's kind of a large increase across the board as far as like those demographics inside of the houselessness population.
Yes. And then we did start getting into some myths about or myths and misconceptions about houselessness. We talked about the idea that people should just get a job as sort of this, almost like they're there by choice, which actually is myth too, is that they choose to be unhoused. So we unpacked
Yes.
those.
Yes. A couple other myths that we did unpack were that people who are unhoused should just get jobs. And so go listen to that episode if you want to know why that's a myth. That unhoused people are dangerous, violent, and/or criminals. Most of the time, they are victims, not necessarily the perpetrator. And that housing or shelter should require contingencies like being clean or clean first or sober first initiatives, which don't work. So that's as far as we got as far as our first myths. But today we have several other myths to unpack. We are going to talk about some solutions and some current research as well to really dive into this further and make sure that we give it the wide berth that it deserves as far as this discussion goes.
Yeah, we did. So there's 8 total myths. We did 4 of them last time, so we're halfway through. So we're picking up on myth number 5. All right. So is
Yes.
there anything else before we jump into our and like we're finally there?
No, I think that's it.
Great. All right. So, myth 5, there's nothing a single person can do about houselessness. There are actually plenty of things that people can do, offering care kits, donating to organizations, volunteering. There are a lot of ways that you can help support unhoused populations that don't necessarily require money directly, but that could be a thing that you choose to do. But even volunteering in places that provide support to unhoused people can be something that helps and eventually helps get them into some permanent housing as well.
Right. And so you might have heard the phrase, like you just mentioned, care kits, and and people don't really know what that includes. And a lot of times, what it might include are simple amenities, right? So it might include clean socks, and some types of clothing that can keep people's appendages warm. So like socks, hats, gloves, something along those lines. It might include maybe some processed snacks or food items that the people can carry on for a long period of time. They can kind of keep in store if they need those. It can include hygiene products like dental care products. It can include sunscreen. It can include a lot of different things like that. So care kits can vary depending on where you live, but you can actually get some for pretty cheap. As a matter of fact, I'm on a page right now where you can buy a care kit that includes a like a beanie type hat, a pair, the not a pair of socks, three pairs of socks, a toothbrush, toothpaste kit, and a couple snacks for like $3.
Wow.
So they don't have to be very expensive, and they can be regionally specific. Like in Florida, we would probably include sunscreen
Right.
because that is something that is a significant concern here.
Yeah, I was just thinking like there are definitely lots of places where it would be relevant to have stuff to keep you warm, but they also really struggle in the summer when it's just unbearably hot. So having
Right.
something to help protect you from the sun or protect your skin, I think would be particularly relevant at different types of year and in different sort of geographical locations, like as you said in Florida. So that's a really good call there.
Right.
All right.
Now, let's unpack myth six for a second. So, myth six is people who are unhoused are transient drifters and have been doing this for a long time. So that's not at all true. As a matter of fact, in 2018, 83% of unhoused people in Seattle were consistent residents of the area, not drifters arriving in the city, not people who just showed up. They're people who had lived in the city and had stayed there for some period of time. Another study showed that in 2019 in LA, 68% of the unhoused people in that population had lived there for over 20 years. So there is a big misconception that unhoused folks are just showing up out of the woodwork and traveling into town, and that's not at all the case.
Is there something I had a question about that? The other thing you had in this myth was like they'd been doing this for a long time. So, like, do you know if you saw any data
Oh
about like, if how long the average sort of unhoused person had been unhoused?
no, I don't have that. I don't have that one.
Okay,
We can pull that up real quick though.
let me see if I can find one quick.
Um, okay. Okay, I got something.
Okay.
All right. Beep. And to the other point in this myth where it says that maybe people have been doing this or been houseless or homeless for a long time, they've been transient for a long time. That's not actually the case either. About 18% of the homeless or houseless population, the unhoused population, have are chronically unhoused. So most of the folks that are currently unhoused are residents of that town who have been residents of that town for a long period of time, and they are only recently unhoused. These are new developments for that person in a lot of different situations. At least 80% of the folks that are unhoused, that's a new development for them.
And I did see that like the term chronically unhoused was specifically people where it had been like 3 years or more, and that most people, even like a extended period of time is a year. So for a lot of these people, it's a brief period of time that they spend in this state, and I that's good in a sense of like it's great that there are not that people sort of enter that system, if you will, and then leave it, hopefully fairly rapidly. But then the other consideration that as you as you mentioned, for a long time, houselessness had been decreasing and now it is increasing again.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, we only made it two myths in, but we were already way past the point at which we need to let the people who are partially responsible for houselessness get a piece of the pie again, and that's advertisers.
Oh man.
All right, we're back after having apparently blamed the people who gave us money for being responsible for people being unhoused.
Oops.
Oops. Let's get into myth number seven. All right, so unhoused people are either addicts or they are suffering from some mental health condition. What's actually going on here, this, God, this is a good one to talk about. The relationship between being unhoused and having an addiction or untreated mental health condition is just, it's very complex and I think very overestimated. 74% of people believe that either generates houselessness, but about 21% of unhoused folks studied reported severe untreated mental health as a contributing factor to their houselessness, and only about 15% reported substance abuse disorders as a contributing factor. I think the problem here too is the cause effect relationship that like people see it as you've got this problem so you end up on the streets, and it's actually more like you end up on the streets and after having had that experience you maybe start to develop some of these problems. So the trauma, the lack of security, the lack of support, the lack of just shelter in general that can exist for people who are unhoused can lead to and exacerbate problems. So problems that didn't exist can start to exist, or problems that did exist can be made worse, and people might turn to substances because they end up on the streets, and then they end up then starting to develop an addiction to those things. So that I think is the important thing to really understand here is that it's actually kind of a reverse cause effect in the way that I think a lot of people imagine are the sort of direction that it goes.
Right. And I think maybe part of, and this is going to be a little bit of armchair psychology on this too, but like I think that what ends up happening is people assume that because somebody's unhoused, there must be a problem, right? And they must assume that that problem is out of that person's control. So they assume that it is either, some addiction gone wild or some type of mental health consideration that was never treated or anything like that. And so they kind of say like, well, it must be this. There's no reason somebody would actually choose to be unhoused or something along those lines. Like they kind of have those conversations, and the truth is that's actually a pretty rare, I don't want to say rare, but it's a pretty uncommon circumstance for the majority of people. It is just bad circumstance. It is, again, I think it goes back to landlords, and how landlords have kind of like gamed the system to make it really difficult to be able to rent. And so, and it's a complex, a vastly complex network of variables that lead to this. But one of the factors, but a minimal factor in this is mental health and addictions.
Yeah, exactly. It's not to say that it never happens that way. It certainly can, but I think the idea that people have is that that usually is why it happens, and it's actually the opposite. It's not usually why it happens, although it is
Right.
sometimes a factor, or maybe even the driving factor. But
Right.
most of the time, it seems like it is not. Although those, as we said, those issues can develop as an outcome of ending up there.
Right. Yeah. Like somebody may not have that issue, but like it may accelerate as a result of being unhoused. Like
Yeah.
that can certainly happen. All right, and the last myth we're going to unpack is that a lot of people think that being unhoused is a choice, and the truth is that the vast majority of unhoused folks are not unhoused by choice. Folks are actively seeking employment, they're seeking shelter. In many instances, shelters can be unsafe or overcrowded for lots of different reasons, and so and maybe one day we'll unpack shelters as like a separate episode because I feel like there's a lot to unpack there with
Sure.
funding and organization and legislation around it. So
Yeah.
that's and this actually leads it to another conversation, which is there is a part of being unhoused and being able to access shelters is this treatment first or sober first approach. And basically what the a lot of places will do is they'll do something like a medication adherence program, a sobriety program, mental health treatment, something like that. And what
Yeah.
what they find is that those programs are often too strict or too cumbersome to actually adhere to, given the other stressors the person has, and they're likely to negatively affect unhoused folks. It's actually sometimes a lot easier to be able to stay out of a shelter and survive and manage than it is to be in a shelter and follow the rigorous guidelines and rules that go along with treatment first or sober first programs.
Yeah, and I do think like it's part of the conversation we had last time, and it's worth reiterating again here, even if you heard it last time, is that it is complicated and it is nuanced. And for some people, probably getting treatment for like addiction will be necessary for them to be able to succeed in a housing placement. But for a lot of people, it won't. So it's like it just needs to be more better individualized to the circumstances that are relevant for each individual. Because
Right.
even there were some news segments recently where they, excuse me, beep, where they were interviewing people who were unhoused, and essentially like in these places where they had these housing first initiatives, while there were a lot of success stories from that, matter of fact more than not, there were instances where because it took this one size fits all approach, there were instances in which it kind of failed, like it didn't work the way that it was supposed to and didn't have the outcome it was supposed to. But I also want to come back to here this idea that people are unhoused by choice, and I've heard people sort of say like, well, if you give them shelter and you give them support, you're just reinforcing their decision to live on the street. And that just brings me back around to the conversation, we had last time, where I was sort of, and I think I've pointed this out, where I'm like, you think that the people who are on the street, if we took away shelters, we took away support programs, they'd be like, well, guess I can't live here anymore. I better just go get a job. I'm like, nobody's doing that. Nobody.
Right.
Like there are a lot of different exceptions for a lot of different things we've talked about where like it's this proportion or that proportion. Zero people are staying on the street by choice because they have support programs. Like that
Right.
is asinine logic. Um, the the point is like taking away those programs just makes their life less likely to continue, and makes it a
Right.
lot harder. Whereas by implementing these types of programs, we make it more likely that they can actually get themselves out of that situation and back into a more stable, more successful situation. And there's a lot of things that we need to talk about in terms of things we can implement to further aid programs to move away from to help resolve this issue of so many people being unhoused. And I do want to further add, like, there are actually some people who choose not to live in houses, who
Right.
like they want to sort of be, there's going to be people who like they want to be out in nature. They want to be out and away from people. They might live in an RV, they might live in a tent, and that they actually did that because they did want to have that lifestyle. So there are going to be some of those people who are there by choice, but like they kind of knew what they were getting into and they were thrust into that situation.
Right.
And again, it's part of why thinking about this as being unhoused and whether or not that also means unsheltered is important, for nuance here. So like there are going to be some people who make this choice. It's such a small percentage that is probably barely even would be count. It's like
Right.
99.9% of people that's not the case for.
Right.
But like it could be the case.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that like and I think you've touched on a great point, which is this idea that folks should be punished for struggles. Like we hear
Right.
this a lot when we hear this with oh well, this person shouldn't receive their social security or their or food stamps or like any sort of like government assistance if they're on drugs. It's like, okay, so that will probably make it better, right? Like this person's already struggling with addiction issues, and substance abuse issues. Let's go ahead and take away their food. I'm sure that's going to stop them from doing crime or like making things worse. I'm sure that's going to make it a lot easier for them to get sober or get the help they need. And like, it's
Yeah.
just such a bullshit and backwards way of looking at helping people, which is like, okay, well, let's take away basic needs and make this situation that's already difficult harder on this person and we'll make them succeed. It's the pull themselves up by their bootstraps type of thing. And it's like that everybody forgets that that was a satirical phrase and people take it to heart, right? Like it's so I struggle with that idea too of like when there are so many policies, so much litigation, so much legislation that's passed that is very much so, oh, well, if you don't do what we tell you to do in this exact instance, we're going to make your life harder so that you
Right.
can make your own life better. And that just
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but people talk about like the carrot and the stick approach, and their solution a lot of times is just always it's always stick. It's always punishment. It's always like do what you ought to or else.
Right.
And again, like these are not people who are making a choice to live unhoused as some kind of political stand or something, or because like they felt like they were too good for their home, and so they were like rather like
Right.
it's such a backwards, ridiculous way of even thinking about it. Like that's not the case. Like spend 2 seconds thinking about this. That's not the case.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, thinking about this instead of like, and I know people might even hear it coming from two people who are behavior analysts and be like, wow, I thought you were all about contingencies. And the thing is, like, we don't make basic necessities dependent on some type of performance. We're talking
Right.
about like access to privileges that, and a privilege is above and beyond what you need to be survive and successful. Like, I'm not gonna withhold um food from someone who doesn't can't otherwise get food. If I were working with someone who wanted to change their behavior and they were really motivated for like a particular snack, that could be withheld and earned because they don't need that to stay alive. But I'm not going to
Right.
starve someone, who because like I can better
Right.
manipulate their behavior by withholding something that they need to survive because just as you said, doing that comes with so many problems. And one of them is like it motivates crime. If they can't get it because it's being withheld from them and they need it to survive, they will find a way, and it will be dangerous and it will be problematic. So it's like those are
Right.
not the things that we hold hostage. Unfortunately, we do hold our audience hostage to ads.
Oh man, that was good.
Thanks. I shouldn't say we hold them hostage. The advertisers hold them hostage. We relinquish them. Not,
Yeah,
that's
we're
not better.
accomplices? Are we
Yeah,
accomplices?
I guess so. Darn it. I just throw us under the bus. We
Oh,
suck.
yeah. Oh man, we got to do better.
All right. Well, that was our second ad break, I think. So do you feel like we have adequately sort of addressed the final myth here of being unhoused as a choice?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like I feel like I think this goes back to the conversation that like what we're talking about is vastly complex. And there are a lot of myths, but I think that those inside of those discussions around those myths, there's a lot of complexity and there is like maybe a little bit or some truth to the situations that we're talking about, but not as often as people think. And so I think we just wanted to kind of paint a better reality of what might be going on with these folks.
Yeah. I think a quick way I was just it sort of occurred to me just now of how I might summarize that last point, I think, with respect to holding holding contingent access to things is that things that are necessary for survival, those everyone deserves to have. But
Right. And to be
additional
clear, everyone,
everyone
everyone,
every human being deserves to be able to survive. Um, Now, privileges that are luxuries, those can be things that are made dependent, and that would make sense. That like those are earned, but you should not have to earn the right to survive. That is granted as a given because we take care of each other because we're human beings.
right.
All right.
Nailed it.
So, how do we solve this houselessness thing that's going on?
Yes, we've got so many ways to solve this. I think one of the ways that we do is, or that we can consider, and I want to be clear, this is not going to solve every single problem. This is not going to resolve every solution, but there are a couple things that we can do as a society that might help to improve the state of houselessness across the board. And one of them is tiny house communities or tiny home communities. And you might be going, well, that's ridiculous, but hear me out, okay? First, The average cost of a tiny home can be as little as $4,000. Now, I want to say this because I know that sounds like, well, that sounds like privilege. And sure, if I have $4,000 to spend on a tiny home, then that is a privilege that I have that money to be able to spend. I'm
Yeah.
talking about this from like a community level, right? When we
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about shelters and the cost of the community at large may only have to pay $4,000 to set up a tiny home that has all the amenities where the person can sleep, they can store clothing, they can prepare food, they can shower, and that gives somebody a baseline to be able to do the other things that we're talking about, which is to get gainful employment, to be able to save up some money, to be able to find a place that is a more permanent place for them. These communities are sustainable. They're cost effective compared to traditional housing, and we can set it up in a space where there are, you can have it in a space that is um like you can have more people in the same space, if you will. Like you can have like a lot of tiny homes on the same property and have like a small community in that space as well.
Yeah, I think and this goes to broadly the consideration that the primary issue here is that these people lack a place that they can go for shelter and safety that is like their place. Like
Right.
they don't have a place that they can be in. And so if we think about how do we lower the barrier of entry such that they can have a place to be in, some of the solutions are like building shelters, building places that are intended to be sort of temporary homes and whatnot, building more of these tiny houses, like, and then making them affordable, if not honestly free. I really think like we have the resources and the means that if we take for if we accept the idea that no one should be unhoused if they don't choose to be, then like we have the resources and means to make that happen. And again,
Right.
like this solves so many more problems than it creates. Like I think there are going to be things that are created from this, which is that like people who are facing substance abuse disorders, like if we just give them a place where they can like go do that, that without also addressing their addictions, then like that could turn out badly. And it might be that like
Sure.
they end up dying and not even being found for a really long time, which ironically is already the case. Not ironically, but that is already kind of the case. But that that could make it easier for them to do that in hiding or potentially expire in that situation. So I do think it's nuanced and it's not the like shotgun approach. This will fix everything, but just considering like removing the barrier to entry is a necessary step.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. Let's also like consider the fact that as part of this lowering barrier to entry thing is we can just use things that we already have. Like we actually have a lot of buildings that aren't being used for anything. If you look around any city, you will find large structures that are not being used for anything. They're just sitting there taking up space.
Yes. And so and just to kind of like this might be warehouses, this could be office buildings, this could be hotels.
There was a
This could be a
casino here
lot
in
of
Reno for a long time that was just sitting there vacant.
That's what I'm saying. So like there and you know, this is going to be a conversation that I think people will say, well, who's going to pay for the renovations? Who's going to pay for bringing the building up to code? Who's going to be That's a conversation that we need to have as a values conversation. Like, do we value housing unhoused people who are unhoused by choice? Do we value our community? Do we value supporting people? That's going to ultimately be a values conversation that leads to, are we willing to spend our money on this type of stuff? And that goes back to the quote at the beginning of the first episode, about we can pay for golf resorts, but you know, do we want to house unhoused people, right?
Yeah. And I think you said
And so
unhoused by choice. I think you meant not by choice.
not by choice. That's what I meant. Sorry, yes, but not by choice. So I wanted to share a brief example of this in Jacksonville, Florida. If you're familiar with Jacksonville, the city is huge. Like it is a large, expansive city. There's a lot of land. Almost all of Duval County is, if I'm not mistaken, is just Jacksonville, the city. So the county is the city, and so there's a lot of warehouses, there's a lot of buildings that have been closed down, because they're maybe the business moved somewhere. And so for a period of time, Jacksonville worked with a large interdisciplinary group, which included some behavior analysts, and they developed these buildings. They worked with these programs. They developed these buildings that included housing, that included treatment programs, that included substance abuse programs, that included all of
Wow.
these things, and they were able to resolve quite a bit of the unhoused population situation in Jacksonville through these programs. I believe there were three specific sites, and each site was able to house at least 150 people, all of which received
Wow.
food, shelter, treatment, and it was successful. The recidivism rates were so low that they talked about replicating this in other major cities because I forget exactly what the recidivism rates were, but they were significantly low. And it was just a matter of enriching their environment and giving them a place to live and then helping them with other services. Like the services included the substance abuse programs, mental health programs, but it also included job support, job aid. It included working with local businesses that had openings and would hire people. It wasn't just teaching them job skills like writing resumes and doing an interview skills. It was also teaching them like where to look, and it was working with those local businesses to hire folks out of this program. And it was incredibly successful.
Yeah. Wow. And in Florida of all places.
Of all
Um,
places.
like really impressive. I would love to see that replicated in all over the country, really. That is exactly the kind of cohesive, comprehensive, systematic approach that is needed, I think, to help address this issue more broadly in a way that I think would catch like 90% of people would be my thought. Like, and I think we need to
Yeah.
do more to like catch the remaining percent, but I'd be willing to get to bet that this addresses like 90% of it.
Yeah, and what they did was they converted like old warehouses into like apartment buildings almost. Like it was
Yeah.
like, and it was temporary shelter, but it was sufficient enough that it helped a significant amount of people.
Well, yeah, and that goes back to the lowering the barrier of entry of just creating the space for this so that there is a place where needed. Like
Yeah.
that is all it takes. All right. Another thing here is to get state and local leaders to commit to policy change. So, as we're talking about these ways that we can sort of address and help solve the issues and crisis that can occur around houselessness and that currently is happening, is that just when we elect and we choose leaders who are committed to making a change for this, but specifically that this includes improvements in budgeting toward houselessness programs and reform to renters' rights and things that protect rent price gouging and that sort of thing. Um, People who look at this issue through the lens of empathy, curiosity, humanism, the people who are like, I think it's perfectly appropriate to ensure that we are very budget conscious about like how much and to what extent we're allocating funds toward this. And
Yeah.
also consider that, as we mentioned, as you just talked about that quote, like we are also spending a ton of money on stuff that they're luxuries that we could instead be building things that help people who are desperately trying to survive and maybe go without that luxury for a little bit longer. And that I think
Right.
is perfectly reasonable way to allocate that. But yes, if we elect and try and get leaders who are actively working towards solutions for this problem that are not like let's punish these people who are already down type solutions, but
Right.
actual solutions where we address the issue at a systemic level.
Absolutely. Now another thing that we can do is we can identify and assess the current problem locally and whether because basically what we have to do is we have to be able to decide or describe whether or not the problem is an acute problem or a chronic problem. So do we know that maybe there is a sudden burst in houselessness because of a natural disaster? Do we know that this is a chronic issue because rent and prices for homes is not affordable in a certain area? We don't really know that in a lot of places. We don't know what the cause of houselessness is in certain areas. So, one thing that we can start doing is something as simple as let's actually identify and assess the cause or the problem in a specific area, given that we already know that most of the people that are unhoused in a particular area are residents of that area. We know that we already are doing studies on job availability, on employment. We're already doing those types of assessments. So there's no reason that we can't allocate a little bit of money towards understanding the actual houselessness problem in a particular area.
Once again, the solution, the right answer to any problem is do science.
Yeah. It's incredible. Incredible.
The wrong answer is advertising.
Oh, that was a good setup.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more, I think, consideration here in terms of possible solutions, things to consider when we're taking this comprehensive view of how to address the issue of houselessness. And one of these I think is really important. I think we mentioned this in the last episode, and honestly, probably deserves a full length episode discussion is this idea
Yes,
of hostile architecture. And we specifically need to advocate against and remove hostile architecture, and it's kind of what it sounds like. The idea of hostile architecture is that it is strategically created and designed to limit certain behaviors in public spaces. And there are certain behaviors that we don't want in public spaces: firing a gun,
sure.
probably doing like bodily fluids things like urinating,
Yeah.
smoking. So like there are lots of things that littering is another one that we do want to limit. But like in hostile architecture, we're specifically talking about like mostly people just doing people things.
Right. So some examples include benches where there's armrests that are placed in the middle of the bench that prevent sleeping on that bench.
Yep.
Like somebody can't lay down on the bench. Like small concrete pyramids. And you might see these every now and again. You might see these in like open concrete spaces where it prevents people from being able to lie down or travel safely or anything like that. You might see metal spikes on stoops where where people can't actually lay down on a stoop or like a windowsill or something like that. Now, just to be clear, hostile architecture was originally not originally. It is often described as a deterrent for skateboarding, the overuse of like trash, like trash receptacles, so people can't just continue to stuff trash into it, pest control, public urination, stuff like that. But ultimately, what ends up happening is hostile architecture has a particular bias against unhoused folks. It makes it
Yeah.
so that people can't stay in certain places, they can't be comfortable in certain places, they can't sleep in certain places, they can't live in certain places. And so this type of architecture is just like a prevention measure. Like, and you might be going like, maybe I've seen this, maybe I haven't. I'll give you a couple examples that you can think of that are like design examples. One is if you ever are walking down a staircase in a major city and you notice there are like brackets or like bumps or like welded like nodules on a railing,
Mhm.
that's to prevent skateboarders from grinding on the rails, right?
Yeah.
If you ever go to a place and you see what looks like wire, just like wire sticking up, like wild hairs growing out of a ledge that prevents birds from landing on that ledge in some
Yeah.
spaces, that is also an example of hostile architecture. So that's one example for pest control in that situation. But
Yeah.
yeah, we probably need to do a whole episode on this because it's just mean.
Yeah. Yeah. The when you see those like any kind of concrete sort of I don't know what to call them. They're like usually a foot high. They usually are right up against a sidewalk. And it's just sort of like a retaining wall, like a concrete retaining wall.
Yeah,
And there's these metal studs every few feet on that is specifically to prevent skateboarding. It conveniently makes it difficult to sit on that for anybody, like people who are unhoused or even just pedestrians.
right,
And so yes, they are specifically designed as we described just to limit and prevent certain behaviors that are sort of undesirable. And again, there are some behaviors that are undesirable in those spaces. But the
right,
thing is, like, what again, it's unnecessary to target and bias toward people who are unhoused, who will just need somewhere to be.
right,
And they're like, you can be anywhere but here. And that's like a sign they see everywhere. I'm like,
right,
well, here is everywhere and everywhere is here. So like now what? Um,
right.
and I think, as you said, a good example of this that's related to people who like I do kind of get in a sense the skateboarding thing where it's like that could be dangerous if it's like a super public place and if there were people who are trying to skateboard around. I mean, I think there's other ways around it than just making hostile architecture. But I think you take the look at the example of the benches with the armrest in the middle. I'm like, nobody's asking for that. That just is so that someone can't lay there. Like that's its only
Right.
real reason to be there. So anyway, a lot of these are sneaky too. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah, there's so many. There's so many. Yeah, that we'll just do an episode on it.
Yeah. All right. Let's dig into some research on this. We're actually talking about unhoused stuff. Hostile architecture is interesting, but unhoused stuff.
Yeah. So, Cofferness and colleagues in 2013, what they did was they used monetary incentives to increase engagement and job skills for unemployed, unhoused, and alcohol-dependent adults. What this important to note, this required participants to engage in the program, and incentives were based on attendance and abstinence from alcohol. And this did have a large effect overall. It wasn't perfect for everybody, but this did improve some engagement in these job participation skills. Now, again, I think it's really important to remember that, and when you read the study, you realize like, oh, we're targeting unemployed, unhoused, and substance abuse related concerns inside of that. So we're using one intervention to target three different issues that might be going on here, and that makes it a little bit more complicated and kind of
Yeah.
there might be some confounds there, but like I think it's really important to remember this is focusing on unemployed folks who are unhoused, and we know that the majority of folks that are unhoused are not necessarily unemployed.
Yeah, they could. Yeah. It's just rent prices are out of control.
Right.
Um, Silverman and colleagues in 2018 created something called the therapeutic workplace. Is my
Mm.
official title voice. And this was explicitly designed to treat drug addiction, and it was aimed at being an anti-poverty program. And so in this, participants received job training, but because this had this a drug addiction piece, they were also required to demonstrate abstinence and medication adherence. Now, the focus on reduce this was beep, this was focused on reducing poverty. Goddamn. Boop. This was focused on reducing poverty, not houselessness per se, but there was a side effect of the program that did reduce houselessness among some participants.
Right. So basically, what they were doing was it was a treatment program where they were treating substance abuse issues, and they were treating and really focus like that was part of it. But they were trying to reduce poverty. They were trying to get people to access more currency, more gainful employment, and as a result, houselessness decreased. So it's possible in this situation where we can make the argument that houselessness is maybe a symptom of other things. Just saying, we've kind of been making that argument the entire time, but
Yeah, yeah.
um, all right. Bodley Scott and colleagues in 2024 reviewed global studies about houselessness and found that psychological interventions can be helpful in addressing related concerns to substance abuse, mental health, well being, antisocial behavior, and social outcomes. They found that CBT and motivational interviewing seemed to be helpful to address those factors as they were directly related to houselessness. But there were no studies like there was nothing here that kind of aimed at specifically reducing houselessness. It was reducing the factors that were related to houselessness, and seeing some of the outcomes related to that.
I can see that idea. And again, I think
Right.
all of this, it seems like, is part of the package. And it feels like, just as you sort of described this program in Jacksonville, it needs to be comprehensive. Like, you need an assessment piece. You need to figure out what the issues are. You need to have appropriate incentives and structure in place to prevent to like facilitate people getting access to the resources they need. We need something to address the issues that are resulting in people ending up on the street in the first place, such as like completely out of control rent price gouging.
Right.
We need access to like resources that people need, like food and shelter, that are just available to people. Like, there's so many pieces of this that would include some things that are dependent on certain behaviors, are not dependent on certain other behaviors, that address things at an individual level while also consider addressing like the systemic broad societal changes that would need to occur. It's going to be a
Yes.
lot. Like, it is a big, complex nut to crack.
Yeah.
But like, it's just so worth it. It's so worth it if you're someone who just doesn't like seeing people out living on the streets, and that just you bothers you because you feel like it looks bad, or because you don't like them, or whatever the issue is. Like, it works in your favor to have this be addressed systematically and in a way that is empathetic for the people who care about other human beings. It works in their favor because they get to see people thrive and succeed, or at the very least suffer less than they were suffering before. It definitely works for the people who are victims of a system where they did not do anything wrong, but they ended up in this situation anyway. And so, like, this is a win-win-win-win-win-win-win-win situation where everybody wins if we just collectively decide to make it a priority and allocate the resources to that we are currently spending on things that are less important.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, to me, when I hear these types of issues and I hear these types of circumstances come up, it makes me think of the general perspective that there's a personal responsibility to address these issues, right? Like you're homeless or you're houseless because of your choices, your behavior, and it's your personal responsibility to get out of it. And I think that every time I see a study, and in the studies that we just mentioned, every time they're talking about these different types of challenges or variables that people experience inside of the house and space. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't talk about the systemic issues that might have led there. And
Right.
so often do they put the onus back on the unhoused person and not the
Right.
system at large. And I think that's something that I like that's a big takeaway that I want to make sure that I'm clear about is that I think if we shift the perspective a little bit from personal responsibility to systemic change, I bet we could probably resolve a majority of these concerns.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And there are other people who think somewhat similar things because there are some books that you can read to learn more about this topic. I don't think I have read any of these, but they're now on my list, and I definitely should. The first one here, Evicted by Matthew Desmond. Have you read all these?
No, I haven't read these, but they came well recommended from a lot of the
Okay.
resources that they came as like forward thinking scientists, like science based,
Mm,
data driven discussions around this topic. So
okay. I'm the title is very intriguing. Evicted. So.
yeah. There's also When We Walk by Kevin Adler and Donald Burns, and The Invisible Child: Poverty, Survival, and Hope in an American City by Andrea Elliott.
Gotta love those colons in there.
Yeah.
Similarly, Invisible Americans, The Tragic Cost of Child Poverty. This is by Jeff Madrick.
Yes, and then there's also No Way Home:
Spider-Man
The
story.
Crisis. Yep. So it's No Way Home: The Crisis of Homelessness and How to Fix It with Intelligence and Humanity by Carrie Jackson, Christopher Rufo, Joseph Tartakovsky, and Wayne Weingarten.
Nice. All right. Another sort of fun, interesting point here that we sort of mentioned is this thing called hoboglyphs. This might be worth a mini all into itself. This is a
Yeah.
collection of symbols used by American unhoused people to communicate with other communities and like other unhoused people. These
Yes.
symbols can be harkened back to Depression era unhoused communities when there was a lot of that going on, and
Yes.
they range from like what they communicate, but they might indicate like danger, keep quiet, authorities on alert, kind people live here, etc. So it's sort of to let other people who find their way to that place know like this is a safe space or it's not, and specifically what we mean by that. But they use these
Yeah.
sort of esoteric symbols that don't give away what they're communicating, but they give enough information that people who know.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. I mean, some of them they just look like some of them are like diamonds and just in lines and squiggles and all kinds of stuff. But they are incredibly impactful. Like they do make the difference between somebody who remains safe in a space versus somebody who doesn't. You know.
Yeah. So anyway, that is I think what we have to say about houselessness for part two. Is there anything else that we forgot or you'd like to add before we get to our credits and recommendations?
Do something.
I
Just do
like, yeah.
something, anything. Make care kits, send care kit to somebody, work in a kitchen, work in a shelter, do something, talk to your legislators, do something because this is something that deserves a lot more attention than it gets.
And if you've got a buck or a couple of bucks on hand, like just giving them that can help too. Like that if you see someone who's like there who is asking for money, a few bucks, like they can use that to buy a meal. Sometimes they can get enough that they can pay for shelter for the night. They can potentially, get some medicine that they needed, whatever. So like, I like to personally just give them money because I don't know what that person necessarily needs and they do. And if for them, and my thought thinking too is like even if for them that means buying alcohol. I'm like, I'm not that's not my call. Like I'm saying, I'm just going to give you resources so you can get what you need for you.
Yes.
And that way you've got something going forward. Because
Yes.
like me giving food to someone who has enough food is not very helpful use of resources, and they're certainly going to be appreciative, but like what they really needed was money to spend on something that they need that I didn't know about. But
Yeah.
like I know that other people feel differently about that. That's fine. But my sort of thinking has always been like, I'm not going to try and police their behavior. If I'm trying to support them in some way, I'm going to let them dictate what that support looks like, by just
Yeah.
giving them something easy like cash. Um,
Yeah.
but but anyway,
Yep.
we do.
One of the best things I heard about that real quick was that like people get real hung up on like giving people money, and it was just like it was you don't know what they're going to spend the money on. Just you giving them money is you doing good for that person on some level.
Yeah.
So take a step back, get out of your own biases, and do good recklessly. Like at the end of the
Yes.
day, you were trying to do something good. Whatever they do with that is their choice, their need, whatever it is. But you did the right thing by trying to help somebody, and that is what you should focus on, and that is what we need to go back to. Is just doing good recklessly.
Love that. Doing good recklessly. The opposite of doing ads intentionally.
Well, shit.
Okay, so we are at the end of this discussion. We are going to recommend some fun things. We are going to recommend some fun things. I can speak words. And
Sometimes.
sometimes. But before I do that, I'm going to do a little bit of our credits here, which is that if you enjoyed what you heard today or in the past, and maybe you've been listening for a while, or this is your first time, and either way, you find yourself thinking, man, I really want this podcast to keep being a podcast and reach further and further. Well, you can support us. Ways that you do that, ways that you can do that include picking up some merch at our merch store, leaving us a rating and a review wherever you get this podcast, telling a friend, just post about it, talk to someone, share us. That gets the word out. And of course, you can join us on Patreon, where you'll get extra sort of club member benefits, including early episodes, behind the scenes content, that sort of thing. And also on our full length episodes, I'll read out a list of names of these people who have taken the plunge to help us, and we appreciate them so much. And that is Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Brad, Stephanie, Brian, Ashley, and Kiara. Thank you all so much for your continued generosity and support. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, y'all are the best.
In addition, I would like to say that if you would like to tell us your thoughts on anything that we mentioned about homelessness, you can email us directly at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com, or you can reach out to us on the social media platforms active over on Blue Sky. We still have a Facebook account, so you can reach us there. And then thank you so much to my team of people without whom I could not make this podcast. Writing and fact checking from Shane and myself. Particular credit goes to Shane for his great work on the notes for this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for letting me write some stuff.
Thank you for all your work. Thank you to everyone, of course, who's listening. But that is not a member of the team. Not, I mean, they are. You're an uncredited sort of like uh adjunct, if you will. But
Yeah.
the our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson, and our audio engineer, music technician, person who does all the good sound stuff is Justin. Um,
Yes.
all right, but I think that we are ready to recommend some things. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, I'll let you go first.
All right. So I am gonna recommend a movie. I'd seen this come out, it came out last year, and I was pretty thrilled with it because I enjoyed the show itself. And it was just like a really fun movie, and that's the movie Saturday Night. Now, this movie is about the very first episode of Saturday Night Live. But it is the behind the scenes chaos that was what was going on behind the scenes before the show aired. And the cast is wonderful, and it is just completely and utterly chaotic. There are a lot of character actors in it that are playing other characters, that are playing skits. There are musicians in it that are really incredible. The way it's edited together is amazing. And it feels claustrophobic and chaotic and anxiety filled, but like in a way that it has a really satisfying payoff. And so I thought it was really great. It was really entertaining, and the whole movie takes place in the hour and a half before the show goes live for the very first time.
I was curious about this movie, but I wasn't sure. So hearing your recommendation makes me feel like I'm definitely going to check it out now. So
Yeah,
entertaining.
it's fun if you like Saturday Night Live. Like, I mean, even
I
if you
do.
don't like Saturday Night Live, it's fun to kind of explore the world of entertainment in that way, I guess.
Cool. All right, I am recommending a board game again, just like the last episode. This board game, there are a series of board games now that are it started with one called Wingspan, and this did a lot for board games and the board gaming hobby. It's I guess broadly speaking about birds is the board game, which you would not think would be a theme that would work for board games. And for a
Sure.
long time, the idea that you could even make a board game about something like birds did not seem like it was going to work, and yet it is wildly successful. But after Finspan, they came out with Wormspan, which is a similar game, but about dragons. It is different enough that it's its own game, but it's similar enough that if you play the first one, then you can understand the second one. And then they came out with Finspan, which, as you might guess, is about fish. And
Love
this
that.
this is probably the most streamlined of the three. It has the fewest things you need to sort of keep track of, and yet has a ton of opportunity for strategy and like cool, I think, complex sort of thinking in terms of how you score points and try and beat your opponents. And I think it's really cool. It's got lots of really cool art with images of like real fish that exist. And so you get to learn a little bit about fish as you play, but also it's just a really cute, well constructed game that's really fun. So it's in the sort of $40 to $45 range, I think. I believe. And it's called Finspan, and it's about fish. So if that's a thing that you're interested in, I will say for people who are very new to gaming, like if the most complex game you've ever played is like Clue, then this is probably going to blow your mind. But for people who are interested, who are like a little bit more in the hobby and have played more complex games, this one's going to feel pretty straightforward and easy. Um,
Cool.
so, yeah, right in the middle there.
I love it.
All right. Well, I think that is what we have to say about board games and movies, as well as this will wrap up our discussion about houselessness. So, if you would be interested to hear from you, as I said, you can reach out to us. But I think that's it. Is there anything that you'd like to add or anything that I forgot before we wrap this one up?
No, I think I feel pretty good about this one.
Cool. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next time. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
Bye. All
Okay.
right.
Exporting.
Yeah, I'm getting there now.
Ugh.
How you feeling? Is it a little bit too tight, or are you feeling okay?
It is tight. We'll be fine. It's it's yeah, we'll just have to hurry. I'll end this for patrons. Bye,
Okay.
patrons.
Bye, patrons.